Ramaswamy.
I was born in 1985, and I grew up into a generation where we were taught to celebrate our diversity and our differences so much that we forgot all of the ways we are really just the same as Americans, bound by a common set of ideals that set this nation into motion in 1776. And this is our moment to revive those common ideals. God is real. There are two genders. Fossil fuels are a requirement for human prosperity. Reverse racism is racism. An open border is not a border. Parents determine the education of their children. The nuclear family is the greatest form of governance known to man. Capitalism lifts us up from poverty. There are 3 branches of government, not 4. And the U.S. Constitution, it is the strongest guarantor of freedom in human history. That is what won us the American Revolution. That is what will win us the revolution of 2024. Thanks for letting me introduce myself tonight. Thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.
We are going to take a brief moment and talk about the elephant not in the room.
Former President Trump has been indicted in 4 different states on 91 counts. He will be processed tomorrow in Georgia at the Fulton County Jail for charges relating to the 2020 election loss.
You all signed a pledge to support the eventual Republican nominee. If former President Trump is convicted in a court of law, would you still support him as your party's choice? Please raise your hand if you would. Just hold on. So just to be clear, Governor Christie, you were kind of late to the game there, but you raised your hand?
No, I'm doing this. Look, I'm doing this.
And
not
I know
this.
you didn't.
Whoa. No.
What's the
Look, here's the bottom line. Someone's got to stop normalizing this conduct. Okay? Now, whether or not you believe that the criminal charges are right or wrong, the conduct is beneath the office of President of the United States. And you know, this is the great thing about this country. Booing is allowed, but it doesn't change the truth. It doesn't change the truth.
Mr. Ramaswamy, you raised your hand supporting.
No. I'd like to get in and respond. Let's just speak the truth, okay? President Trump, I believe, was the best president of the 21st century. It's a fact. And Chris Christie, honest to God, your claim that Donald Trump is motivated by vengeance and grievance would be a lot more credible if your entire campaign were not based on vengeance and grievance against one man. And if people at home want to see a bunch of people blindly bashing Donald Trump without an iota of vision for this country, they could just change the channel to MSNBC right now. But I'm not running for president of MSNBC. I am running for president of the United States. We're skating on thin ice, and we cannot set a precedent where the party in power uses police force to indict its political opponents. It is wrong. We have to end the weaponization of justice in this country.
30 seconds, Governor DeSantis.
Look, let me take
No, I'm sorry. 30 seconds, Governor Christie.
You make me laugh because you sit here in an answer. You sit here in an answer right.
Hold on one second.
You sit here in an answer.
Go ahead, Governor Christie.
Hold on, Governor Christie.
Hold on.
Well, so listen, the more time we spend doing this, the less time they can talk about issues you want to talk about. So let's just get through this section. Governor Christie.
You sit here talking about how you want to stand up for the rule of law.
Yes.
And law and order. And the fact is that it can't be selective. In your book, you had much different things to say about Donald Trump than you're saying here tonight.
That's not true.
Well, it is very true.
That is not true.
It's very true. I read it,
Because
and
there's
I know.
a difference between bad behavior and illegal behavior, Chris. And you, as a prosecutor, should know better.
Yeah, you know what? I know a lot better.
There's a difference between bad behavior.
And I know a lot better than you do. You've never done it, like you've never done anything to try to advance the interests of this government except to put yourself forward as a candidate tonight. And here's the thing. We've stood up for law and order. I did it as U.S. attorney. I did it as governor. And I am not going to bow to anyone when we have a president of the United States who disrespects the Constitution. He said, your MSNBC contributor. He said,
these are politicized indictments,
Martha,
and we have to call out the truth.
Martha, it's important to say that the president said, Donald Trump said, it's okay to suspend the Constitution. Now, the oath you take is to preserve, protect, and defend, not suspend. I will always stand up for our Constitution, regardless of the political pressure.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.
So look, we have a crisis of achievement. Let's shut down the head of the snake, the Department of Education. Take that $80 billion, put it in the hands of parents across this country. This is the civil rights issue of our time. Allow any parent to choose where they send their kids to school. End the teachers' unions at the local level to allow public schools to compete. And then revive our national identity where every high school senior should have to pass the same civics test that, frankly, every immigrant, including my mother, had to pass in order to become a citizen of this country. And the fact of the matter is, look, there's a part of education policy that also rests with the family. I didn't grow up in money, but you know the word privilege gets used a lot? Well, you know what? I did have the ultimate privilege of two parents in the house with a focus on educational achievement. And I want every kid to enjoy that. So part of the problem is we also have a federal government that pays single women more not to have a man in the house than to have a man in the house, contributing to an epidemic of fatherlessness. And I think that goes hand in glove with the education crisis as well, because we have to remember education starts with the family, and the nuclear family is the greatest form of governance known to mankind.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.
Our diversity is not our strength. Our strength is what unites us across that diversity. And yes, those are radical ideals. Yes, those are extreme ideals. But those are the ideals we're going to have to revive together if we're to have our last best chance of uniting as a diverse people. And for me, yes, I'm running for this presidential election. But November 2024, when the election takes place, January 2025, when I take office, that's not the destination. That is the start line. The destination for me is January of 2033, when I leave office after 2 terms. I think a lot about what I want to tell you all, what I want to tell my family, my 2 sons who are going through a lot with us on this campaign to be part of this. What do I want to tell them that we did? What do I want to tell you all that we did? I'm not a politician. I don't pay attention to inauguration speeches. They bore me, to be honest with you, because they're filled with unfulfilled promises. But I do pay attention to farewell speeches. Probably the greatest in modern history was Ronald Reagan's in January of 1989. His last speech from the Oval Office. What did he say? He said that we revived a sort of national character that we lacked when he first took office in 1981. So yes, I think about what do I want to be telling you all that we actually did when I leave office in January 2033. I want to tell you that once again in the United States of America, we have 3 branches of government, not 4, that we shut down the administrative state and reduced the federal employee head count by over 75%. I want to tell you that we are no longer dependent on our enemy, Communist China, for our modern way of life. I want to tell you that our economy is growing once again at the fastest rate in the developed world because we embrace capitalism instead of apologizing for it. But above all, I want to tell you that my two sons and their generation, that they are once again proud to be citizens of this nation. That is what we need to revive, is pass on that American identity to our sons and daughters. 16%, less than 16% of Gen Z says today that they're proud to be American. 60% of them say they would sooner give up their right to vote than to give up their access to TikTok. I'm not making this up. I wish this was a joke. This is the stuff of national crisis. And the only way we're actually going to fix that crisis is by all of us, not just me, all of us, starting to speak openly again and standing for the truth. At your parent-teacher conferences, at the dinner table, with your kids, with your parents, with your friends, when you're in that conference room where you're the only person in the room who believes what you do, you have an obligation now, we have an obligation now, to stand up and say it. You don't know the best measure of how well we're doing as a country? It is the percentage of people who feel free to say what they actually think in public. Right now, we're doing poorly. The only way we're going to do better is all of us starting to talk openly again. And that is what this campaign is really all about. Speaking the truth, the hard truths, without apology, standing up for the truth, because that is who we are as a people. God is real. There are two genders. Fossil fuels are a requirement for human prosperity. Reverse racism is racism. An open border is not a border. Parents determine the education of their children. The nuclear family is the greatest form of governance known to mankind. Capitalism is the best system known to man to lift us up from poverty. There are 3 branches of government, not 4. And the U.S. Constitution, it is the strongest guarantor of freedom in human history. That is the truth. We fight for the truth. We stand up for the truth. That is what won us the American Revolution. That is what will win us the revolution of 2024. Thank you all. Let's open this up. Let's have a conversation. Thank you for coming out this afternoon. We're just getting warmed up. I'm excited to hear from you guys. Thank you. Questions? Anybody have questions? And anyone out there, too, if they want to come on in. I know they were waiting, so.
I have one question. Are you a Johnny Cash fan?
I do like Johnny Cash.
You came in the first thing I said the minute.
How'd you know?
So, getting serious. You said a lot.
I think he has a second question.
You said a lot of things about the president elected, what you're going to do, whoever is elected is going to do. How do you do that other than through executive action when you need to work with the Congress?
Great question. What's your name? Rich. So, this is really important. This is a mistake that most presidential candidates make. They put their legislative agenda first. I am not going to make promises on what Congress will or won't do. Look, I hope to deliver a landslide election. I don't want a 50.1 tug of war. I think that could be disastrous for this country. And I'm in this race because I think I'm the only person who can actually win in a landslide by bringing young people along with us. Building a multi-ethnic, working-class coalition like Reagan did in 1980. I think we need a Reagan 1980-style landslide. So I want a landslide in Congress, I want both houses of Congress, and I want a moral mandate. But I still can't promise you what Congress is going to do. Trump said repeal and replace Obamacare. Didn't happen. Even when a Republican-controlled Congress could have done it, they didn't. I am focused on what the U.S. president can do without asking Congress for permission or authority. So I believe in the Constitution. Article 2 of the Constitution says there is one executive branch. Not 2, not 100. One executive branch. That means everybody in the executive branch reports into the U.S. president. I've been a CEO. I'm not a politician. I understand. I've had a legal background along the way, but if somebody works for you and you can't fire them, that means they don't work for you. It means you work for them because you're responsible for what they do without having any authority to change it. And so, yes, it's going to take an outsider with sharp elbows willing to break some glass to get that done, but it has to be an outsider who knows something about the Constitution, or else they will dupe you. That's what I think happened last time around. They told President Trump, you can't fire people because they have civil service protections. Well, read the law. Turns out the civil service protections only apply to individual firings. They do not apply to mass layoffs. And mass layoffs are absolutely what I will bring to the D.C. bureaucracy. This is what the U.S. president has a job to do. Lead the executive branch as a chief executive. And that's the combination it takes. An outsider who comes in, is not bought and paid for, as a super PAC puppet by the mega donor class that has an interest in keeping that administrative state intact. It has to be an independent patriot who speaks the truth, not a super PAC puppet, but also somebody who has a deep understanding of the laws and the Constitution of this country. And I don't believe in boasting or false self-praise, but one of the reasons I'm motivated in this mission is that I think I am the single presidential candidate in the last 30 years who has the best legal understanding of how to actually get this job done. And I am confident that by the end of my first term, we will have reduced the federal employee headcount by at least 75%, 50% by the end of year one. That is how we win. Thank you for that question, Rick.
Vivek, I've heard you talk about this before, but I would like for you to share with everyone your faith and your religion, because I think it's important to Iowans to understand you.
I think it's important to understand every aspect of the next person who leads this country as commander-in-chief. So I believe in God. I believe in one true God. I am Hindu. I was raised in the Hindu tradition by my parents. We raised our two sons in the same faith.
But you went to a Catholic school.
I did go to a Catholic school. And so it so happens that I've read the Bible more closely perhaps than many, if not most, of my Christian friends. And here's what I will say. We share the same Judeo-Christian values that this nation was founded on. And we live by those values. And that much I can say with firm conviction. I'm not running for pastor-in-chief. I would not be qualified for that. But I'm running for commander-in-chief. And what matters there is that the values set enshrined in the Bible to our Constitution. Our Constitution, keep in mind, was made for a moral people, as John Adams said. Not for just a aimless passage of time, higher mammals with two legs going through the motions. No. A moral people. Yes, I believe in that. We live according to those values. And the standard I want you all to hold me to as your next president is the standard I hope to hold myself to. I've got two young sons. I want to be able to look them in the eye and say in good conscience, without wincing, without holding my nose, that I want you to grow up and be like him. Whoever that is in the White House. That's a high standard when I think about what I want to tell my sons. That is the standard I want you to hold me to. Think of the values that we grew up in, of sacrifice, duty. You know, the faith tradition I grew up in, the two things that are most important, speak truth and do your duty. That permeates the thing about doing your duty and making a sacrifice to do it. That to me is one of the most fundamental threads between the Old Testament and New. God asked Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac. He didn't force him to follow through with it, but in the New Testament, God actually sacrifices his son to the people.
You probably know the Bible better than we do.
Well, it speaks, it never felt like I read the Bible for the first time, actually. It was almost, there was never a first time I read the Bible, and I think that reflects the sheer groundedness and values we have. The real issue relating to religion in this country, though, that I should comment on is, we do have an established religion in this country. It is a militant form of secularism, that takes the form of wokeism and transgenderism and climatism. These are really substitutes for the real thing. Right? If you have a hole the size of God in your heart and God does not fill it, something else will instead. The same can be said for belief in a nation. You don't pledge allegiance to the flag, you're going to pledge allegiance to something. Right? I mean, to use another Book of Exodus example. When the Israelites escaped from the Pharaoh, and they're lost in that desert, they're not yet finding the promised land. What do they say? We want to go back and be ruled by the Pharaoh. And I think this is a moment for us, especially as conservatives, to look ourselves in the mirror and ask ourselves, yeah, we could point to the powers that be all we want. Right? They're imposing this climate agenda on us. COVIDism for those 2 years, locking us down. We can ask that question all we want, but the deeper question is, after we take a long, hard look in the mirror, what is it inside us that makes us want to bend the knee? See, I think that's the question we need to ask in this country. And I think a revival of faith is going to be a key part of that. And that's why I stand for religious liberty, with ardence, in a way that it just might take someone different in many senses, an outsider to the political system, a member of a different generation. And yes, I know that it's even one more curveball on top of that, a guy with a slightly different than the traditional faith that we've had of our U.S. president, to stand firmly with conviction for actually the values that made this country great in the first place. Thank you for that question. I appreciate it so much. Very honest question. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you. It's good to be
Good
here.
question, or I guess 2 in 1. So all presidents obviously have advisors. First question would be, how do we know that you're not just going to do what these smart advisors advise the presidents? And then how are you going to choose your advisors?
Yeah, it's a good question. So it's really important for me to have a good number of advisors who come from outside the government. And by the way, this has always been my philosophy in whatever I've built. So I built a biotech company that developed 5 medicines that are FDA approved today. One of them is a life-saving therapy in kids. 20 of them are born every year with a genetic disease. 100% of them die by the age of 3 if untreated. A majority of these kids, now treated, are able to live lives of normal duration. Another one for prostate cancer. Thank you. For women's health conditions like endometriosis and uterine fibroids. This was done against the advice of the traditional people who came from the pharma industry, because the rest of pharma had abandoned these areas. So about half the people at the company that I recruited purposely came from outside of big pharma. That's unheard of, right? They're people from other industries, totally different, but who said, yeah, this is a broken industry, it appears to be corrupt, let's just change it, do it differently. When I built my asset management firm, Strive, to compete against the likes of BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard by standing up to the ESG cartel and instead telling companies to focus on profits and products over politics and social agendas, again, it was over 50% outsiders to the asset management industry who stepped in to do it. Even in this political campaign, many people in my campaign right now, in our growing team, it's kind of like a company, it's short-lived. It's 18 months or so till we get to the election from when we start, are still outsiders. Many of them are outsiders to politics, and I think that's a good thing. The more people who I meet growing up within politics, the more I think that that's a better decision we've made. I want to take my approach to the federal government the same way. We'll have some people who come from within, who are open-minded, but a good number of people who bring a blank slate, a fresh impression. I mean, I've enjoyed getting to know better Elon Musk recently. I expect him to be an interesting advisor of mine, because he laid off 75% of the employees at Twitter. Well, I want to lay off 75% of the employees in the federal government. And then the effectiveness actually went up. Oh, and by the way, he released, I liked one of the things he did, released the Twitter files. Just make it transparent. You don't have to, you can talk about what changes you want to make later, but first, shine the sunlight. Roll the log over, see what crawls out. I want to release the state action files. I've said this for a long time, actually. Anytime the federal government has pressured a private company to do what the federal government could not do on its own, publish it. Let's see it. Let's see what crawls out. We have to have transparency. We have to have the truth if we're to reform, and then shut down those agencies and then You know, kind of like you did to Twitter, he turned it into X. That's kind of what I want to turn the federal government into, is one big X as well, through most of those administrative agencies. But it gives you a sense of people coming in from the outside. You know, people whose names you wouldn't have heard of, but who are really smart in their respective areas of domains of understanding how to drive effectiveness in an organization that didn't come from government. It's a big part of how I'll do it. But the other thing that's really important is you can't just bend the knee to your advisor. You're not here to be a puppet in the White House. Now, the current president we have in the White House is absolutely a puppet. I don't say this jokingly. Joe Biden is not running this country. He is a human appearance fill-in that is doing the work of the managerial class in the administrative state. I do not want to be a hollowed out husk of a puppet. So when those same advisors tell me, as they told Trump, that no, you can't fire these people because of civil service protections, I'll say, thank you very much, but I've read the law, and I've studied the Constitution, and we're going to fire them. And they're going to sue us, and we're going to take it to the Supreme Court. But I've also studied the Supreme Court, and know that we will win 6-3 when we get there, and that that's a good thing. Because now the next president won't have his hands tied in the same way. That's how we drive change, with conviction. I appreciate that question. Thank you. Thank you. We'll go back here.
I'll keep it short and sweet. Thanks for taking my question. You mentioned that you grew several companies. So my question is essentially, do you have any plans for making it easier for businesses to grow and thrive, especially in smaller communities, small businesses, or I guess businesses of any size? What are your plans on that, thoughts on that?
Great question. So not only do we have to fire that 75% headcount reduction in the federal government, that's the fountainhead of new regulations that act like a wet blanket on the U.S. economy. But on day one, and I'll tell you why I'll do this, it's on principle. On day one, I will rescind a majority of the federal regulations that were created without Congress actually acting. So probably the most important Supreme Court case of the last decade was West Virginia versus EPA. It came out last year. And what that said is, if a three-letter agency makes a rule that Congress never expressly gave it the power to issue, then that rule is null and void. That particular rule was applied to the coal industry that the EPA tried to apply, but Congress never said they were okay with that rule. It's causing most coal plants to shut down. Well, if that rule was unconstitutional, it turns out that quite literally, most federal regulations, like a majority of them, are also unconstitutional. From the SEC to the FDA to the EPA to the FTC to the God knows what. That is the single damper on the entire U.S. economy for businesses large and small. And that it can happen on day one, on January 20th of 2025. This unlocks our economy. We're growing at 1-point-something% GDP growth right now. I will get us back to 5+% GDP growth by doing things that the U.S. president can do. Roll back the regulations that hamper the U.S. energy sector. Drill, frack, burn coal, embrace nuclear energy. That unlocks our economy. Put people back to work by no longer paying them more to stay at home. We have a workforce shortage in the federal government. Let's put people back to the work, actually, because of the regulations coming from the federal government, because of the payments coming from the federal government. Stabilize the U.S. dollar. We have a dollar that's been wildly volatile. You know, imagine if the number of minutes in an hour fluctuated. None of us would be here at the same time. We'd be, bumping into each other somewhere in Jasper. It's sort of, it's meaningless. Well, when the dollar fluctuates as much, it doesn't really help for finding the best investment project. So I will peg the dollar to a basket of commodities: gold, silver, nickel, agricultural and farm commodities. This is how you stabilize the dollar and grow an economy. And back when we had a stable dollar, that's when we had the greatest growth. When you don't have a stable dollar, that's when you see the rise of alternatives to the dollar, like the BRICS system that's now coming into existence on the other side of the world. And most importantly, rescinding those federal regulations and firing the people who create them. This gets us back to a booming economy in this country. And you know what, young people, we talked about national pride. When But young people are more proud of a country where they're making more money in that country. And it will make it that much easier to reunite this country if we're doing it against the backdrop of real economic growth, once again, in the United States of America. I appreciate that, Aaron. Thank you. What's your name? Mark, appreciate that. We'll take a couple more, and then we'll stick around and we'll take some pictures and everything else.
So many Republicans have lost faith in our voting system, and they say they're not going to vote because it doesn't matter. How are we going to change that?
Well, I think the first part of the concern is correct. The second part is completely backwards in terms of the way we actually have to correct for this, right? So let me just give you my solution on election integrity in this country. Okay, I think we have to move forward as one nation. And so here's the deal I'm willing to do with people who even disagree with me on this topic or say that you're a threat to our democracy for even bringing up the question about election integrity. You're a threat to our democracy. Whose democracy? I don't know, they never say, but our democracy. Okay? So I had to ask the gods at MSNBC. I really don't get it. Said them too. So here's what I would say. This should not, what I'm going to give you is not going to be controversial. Single day voting on election day. Make election day a national holiday so people can actually do it. Paper ballots. And most importantly, government-issued ID that matches the voter file. This is practical. Very practical. Simple stuff. And here's the commitment I will make. And I will keep this commitment, and I will ask all of you to join me as I lead this country to help us keep this commitment. If we achieve that in this country, very practical, very achievable. It's not theoretical stuff, like really tangible stuff. If we achieve those four things, then I will lead this country and I will ask all of you to come along with me in dropping our complaints about ballot fraud or election integrity. And I think that if you really believe that the questions about and concerns, which I share, about election integrity, are a threat to our democracy, then this should be a simple proposal that you should be able to agree to. One day voting, that is a holiday, paper ballot and government-issued ID matching the voter file. This is doable. But if we land on the moon, we can certainly do this. So the question is, do we have the will to actually do it? I can't do it yet. I'm a private citizen. I'm not that different than you guys. All I did is I filled out a form that said I'm running for president, so now I'm up here and get to talk to you guys. I'm a private citizen. Many of you are business owners. I'm a business owner too. I'm a father of 2 sons. I'm running for president as an outsider, though. Because the only way we're going to get that done is if we win this election in a landslide. But I think about a train that's riding broken rails. I'm like the train. I can't fix the rails. The best we can do is be a freight train and steamroll through anything that stands in our way. So I want to build that broad coalition. I've traveled from the south side of Chicago to Kensington in the inner city of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, all the way to California, even the few days before the debate. I'm on the West Coast. People ask, what the heck are you doing? I'm not running to lead a political party. I am running to lead a nation. And I think that in order to revive that nation, when we are skating on such thin ice as a country, we cannot afford an election where the Monday after Election Day, MSNBC and CNN are quietly trotting out the winner. Now, this cannot be another razor-thin election. This has to be a moral mandate, like Reagan delivered in 1980. And my top reason for being in this race is that because of the generation that I represent, because I am an outsider, because I'm not a product of partisan politics, because I've lived the American dream and can speak to it, I think I am the only person in this race who can actually deliver that landslide, that moral mandate. And after we've done that, then yes, we will get the 4 things I said done, so we once again have election security in the United States of America. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Thank you. Just coming back. Got a question back there.
Well, comment, question, you know.
Okay. A question, comment.
Yes. To refer back to you, I just want to be honest, and your answer was slightly offensive. the United States of America has the most secure elections. We send our military to other countries to ensure they have safe and fair elections. And have you ever volunteered or worked for an election? So I just want to say that's very offensive. And if you don't believe in our military when they go over to other countries and ensure that and that they're safe, I don't think you've ever actually worked an election.
May I ask you a question?
Yes.
What's your name?
My name is Michelle.
Michelle. First of all, I want to say it takes a lot of courage to come to a room full of people who probably, you would assume, disagree with you, to still stand up and speak your mind. And I want to congratulate you. I respect that. I really do. That's very American, actually. It's distinctly American. And we stand for that in this principle in this country. Now, let me ask you a question, honestly. What was offensive?
The fact that you said we will make our elections secure. Our elections are secure. I would say the problems are different states have different timings, and so people don't understand. And I'll give an example, right? When the polls closed on election day, Joe Biden was leading Florida because in Florida, they count the mail-in ballots first, right?
Gotcha.
And then they count the day of. So at the end of the evening, Biden no longer had this huge lead, and Trump won Florida. The opposite happened in Pennsylvania, right?
Can I just ask you one question? Because I know that we're getting into the electoral history of this, but because this is productive. What is offensive about Election Day being a holiday or voting on Election Day?
You said,
or paper
ballots.
ballots.
What was offensive was you said we will make the election secure again. They are already secure. It is the nonsense and people saying it's not secure that's causing people to think that they're not secure.
So can I make you a deal? Because we're both Americans, we both share our principles of free speech in common. Do you want to move this nation forward? Do you want to be united as one nation? Because I do. My sense is you do too.
Right.
Okay. So let's make a deal here. The deal is this. Let's make Election Day a national holiday. We can call it National Suffrage Day. Celebrate actually many of the events of our national history of different groups that were denied suffrage, getting suffrage. That's Election Day as a holiday. Let's agree that we all vote on that day. Accommodations for handicapped people that can't leave their home, fine, we'll deal with that. But Election Day, everybody votes on Election Day with a paper ballot, and they have to present government-issued ID. Just like you have to do to drive a car, you have to present government-issued ID to cast your ballot. And if you agree with me that you would support a system like that, that I will make a commitment as the next president of the United States, if that's my role, that if we've achieved that, I will lead everybody in this country to say that we are done talking about insecure elections or loss of ballot faith or ballot integrity, and that moves our nation forward. Are you willing to do that deal with me? Because I think it will help move our nation forward.
There's concern because, like, my mother's disabled. Now, listen.
So accommodations for the disabled.
There is secure. There are people that cannot go to the polls due to work. I mean, you have doctors and surgeons that may not. I mean, there has to be.
There will be accommodations. Accommodations.
I will guarantee that. Somebody could be on vacation for a month in Europe doing whatever.
Well, then they don't get to vote. If vacation, don't get to vote. Handicap or doctor working, yes, you do. Vacation in Europe, maybe you should stay there. but I'm just kidding around.
So, I mean, I'm not saying things can't change
Yeah.
and make better, but to say we're not secure when we are the ones that send our military around the world to secure elections, that, I mean, like, I've never been in the military.
Well, thank you for your question. And I will tell you this, if we, as a fellow American one to another who disagrees on some of the premise, we have to move this nation forward. I've laid out a very practical way to do it. If none of those four elements are offensive, forget everything else I said then. Just let's agree on those four elements, and I will do my part, and we will stop complaining about election integrity once we've achieved that practical solution. So thank you for asking that question. I appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I love a lot of what I see in here. This is great. I have one stumbling block I'm running into,
Sure.
and that is my perceived where you are on Israel. Please articulate that.
Absolutely. Thank you. So one of the things I've learned in partisan politics, I'm new to politics, is this is a dirty game. People say they'll distort what you say. I did not expect people will literally make up things that you've never said. So I'll be very clear about where I am on Israel. By the end of my first term, our relationship with Israel will be stronger than it has ever been, because I approach it as a true friendship, not as some sort of transactional client relationship. And I say this as somebody who's been to Israel countless times in the last decade. Some of my closest business partners are in Israel, or were, back when I was running my company, were in Israel. Here's what I believe. We need to get over the most anti-Semitic policy the West has had, which is holding Israel hostage over the Palestine issue, by taking the Abraham Accords summit and moving that to the next level. This was a great accomplishment of the Trump administration. Started to integrate Israel back into the security and economic infrastructure of the Middle East, even before the Palestine issue is resolved. I want to take that to the next level. Get Saudi Arabia, Oman, Qatar, Indonesia into that pact. I want to further stand firmly with Israel to make sure that Iran never, never, ever, ever gets any nuclear capability. Fundamental to our own security interests and Israel's. And I also want to do what good friends do to one another. They learn from each other. I would love border policies like Israel has in our own country. Okay? I would love tough on crime policies like Israel has in our own country. I would love a strong national identity like Israel has in our own country. An iron dome that protects Israel appropriately from Hamas. We want that, which we don't have in this country. That's what good friends do. They allow each other to be the best version of themselves by supporting each other and learning from each other. That's what I want our friendship with Israel to look like. Oh, and military too, for that matter. In the training, there's never been a war that they've lost, actually. Hyper-competence and the civic duty and spirit of young people having to serve 2 years in the military. I don't think mandatory service is the way we do it in the U.S., but the spirit of that is a beautiful thing that we could learn a lot from in the United States of America. And so the funny thing is, just so people understand probably where your question's coming from, there are a bunch of headlines last week before, it's interesting how, heading into the debate, when you're surging in the polls, the kind of headlines that come out. But that's okay, it's politics, and I can handle it. You can't handle the heat, you stay out of the kitchen, they say, so I'll handle the heat. But there was a statement I made in a long-form podcast that said, wouldn't it be a dream if we get to a place where Israel is so strongly integrated back into the security and economic infrastructure of the Middle East that they no longer even require the $3 billion in aid that we give them, which was then distorted to a statement that says Ramaswamy proposes ending aid to Israel like for other Middle Eastern countries, which is nonsense. It doesn't even make sense. $3 billion a year is not even that much. It's like a tiny drop in the bucket. And most of that actually comes from infrastructure here in the United States. But the point is, and it's a good question, it was a good reminder for all of us, is that I'm not a politician. Right? Whatever that binder is that gets handed down from on high to Republican politicians of how you're supposed to say things about issues, no one ever gave that one to me. Never got that binder. I'm saying things based on first principles and actual convictions. And so for me, it's not like that. The binder, as I've learned, teaches you to say, we stand with Israel, and we're firm. That's like the first thing you're supposed to say, and then you go to the second thing. My reason for standing with Israel is because I believe it is deeply in American interests to do so. And I come to it with my own conviction, which means we're actually going to see it through, rather than approaching it as a check-the-box transactional client relationship. No, it will be a true friendship and partnership. And that's how I see it. Thank you for asking that question. I'm really glad about it.
I just need to know your stance on abortion. Are you pro-choice or pro-life?
I am pro-life. I am firmly pro-life. And I'm proud of this state. I was here, actually, I made a point to be here on the day I met with Kim Reynolds and saw the legislature sign that into law. Well, and then she signed it into law a week later. We were here for that. That was historic. That's federalism at work. That is the Constitution at work in this country.
And I just want to say a word about this because I don't think this has to be as divisive as we made it out to be. I think most people in the United States of America share our pro-life instincts. I can prove that to you. Take the case of, Clarence Thomas actually asked about this, the case of a pregnant woman walking down the street. She's assaulted. The unborn child dies as a result. I challenge anybody to find me one person in the United States of America who will say that that criminal does not deserve liability for that death. I haven't found a single one yet. That says we share the same instincts. And for my part, same way that I answered the other individual's question about elections, here's what I'll say is we'll do our part. Let's talk about adoption policies. Let's talk about paths to child care. Let's talk about greater sexual responsibility for men. Genetic paternity tests are reliable. Let's put teeth into the law. I will do all of those things. But this is not about men's rights and women's rights anymore. We're all in this together. It is about human rights. And that's the way I'll approach it as your next president. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. One more question. Let's do it.
Hello, I'd like to ask how,
Did you have one too? Okay, good.
Sorry about that.
Oh, we have one. We'll do one more and then one more. Okay, got it.
You're involved in the tech industry, right? How do you see bringing new tech jobs to a state like Iowa? How do you see that working out?
I think it could work out great, actually. Because, so I'm from Ohio, and we're seeing Intel, for example, build its new plant in the middle of Ohio. That's driven a boom to Columbus, Ohio, where my family lives now. And I think the reality is we also have, it sounds silly to say, but it's actually really true in parts of the country like Iowa, like Ohio. We actually have vast amounts of space that's relatively inexpensive compared to where many of these tech companies have now cloistered themselves, generally in the west coast of the United States, and even South Florida, et cetera, which has been seeing skyrocketing inflation, twice that of the rest of the country. So I think this is actually an opportunity for places like Nebraska and Iowa and Ohio to step up and seize that opportunity. I also think that one of the things that we're lacking in this country is an educational system that actually prioritizes true achievement. We have distorted the scales where we get a Department of Education that tilts the scales for somebody to become a four-year gender studies major in California and will graduate with a bunch of debt, without people being able to go to vocational schools or trade schools, some of which actually train for tech skills, even high-tech skills, much better than a, supposed liberal arts education that's really just a form of indoctrination, and you're charged $70,000 a year to live in a college campus where, here's what's driving up the cost of college. We don't need a bunch of woke Four Seasons resorts, right? That's what's driving up the cost of college education with diversity deans and administrators of God knows what. Instead, we actually need more technical education in this country. Combine that with actual, I would say tax incentives, but you've already done a good job of bringing down the tax rate in this country, in this state. Unlike states like California, you're going to see a natural progression. And I predict it's already happening, and I predict it's going to only continue and be good for parts of the country that had been left behind by the last wave of the first tech boom. Great question. I really appreciate that. I'll quickly take one last one, and then we'll wrap it up.
Hi, my name's Keith, and I have an observation and a question. The observation is, you are the biggest breath of fresh air I have ever seen in my life.
I appreciate it.
I turned 18 a lot. In 1980, I turned 18. I'm a 61-year-old white guy now. I'm just an old white guy.
You're 61?
Yes.
That's pretty young.
Well, thank you very much. I have a good surgeon. Anyway, Reagan, his first term was when I became a Republican. I can remember exactly when it happened. At the Republican National Convention, Jack Kemp introduced Ronald Reagan. He was supposed to talk 5 minutes. He went on for like 90. And he said a thing that you touched on today. He said the success of a social welfare program should be judged by how many people don't need it as how many need it. And that's what he said about, I think it was the military or something.
Yes.
The less we need, the better it is.
Yes.
Okay. Looking at this, I love this.
Thank you.
How can you argue with any of this, okay? I look at this, and before you started speaking, and I saw you on television, I had the same first impression from television and this book in particular,
Oh, thanks.
Anyway,
I appreciate
I love your sensibility. You got me jazzed. Anyway,
Thank you.
the one thing that bothers me that nobody wants to talk about is the debt. And I loved Reagan, because Reagan always was making lemonade out of all the crap they gave him. You know?
He did.
When he get crap, make lemonade. I had an idea that I just want to bounce it off you and see if you could run with it, because I'm no financial guy. But how about if we take all this debt that we owe all these people that pretty much hate us, and I looked it up today, we're paying 2.84% on the national debt. That's the interest rate, my understanding is. How about if we issued, like, we call it a Patriot bond, and they started only $1,000, and you pay 5% and never tax it, locally, federally, or at the state level. But it's to buy the debt back. It's kind of like George Bailey in It's a Wonderful Life. When they were raiding the bank or the savings loan, he said, look, that debt's here. It's in your house and your business and this. Why don't we buy this back and sell it
It's
to
an
Americans?
interesting idea.
Now,
You got my financial cogs
think
turning
about
in my
Think
head
about
now.
this. You're in a room in Iowa. Iowa has more citizens over 85 than any state in the union.
Is that right?
By per capita, yeah.
Okay. Per
We're a
capita.
very old state. And these, well, I don't want to, I'm 61 now, so I'm with you. Anyway, when you get in your 70s and 80s, you really don't want to risk it on Wall Street. You need like a CD or a bond or something. And if we could give 5% tax-free to everyone, including people my age and older, it could be a monthly income, and we would own our debt. Now, I don't know how that would affect. I just think it's better if we own the debt than our enemies owning the debt.
Oh, it's certainly China owning the debt, which
Yeah,
they're lording over us.
and I could see somebody as hip as you selling it. You know what I mean? You've got a good. You're a salesman. You're
I like that. Thank you. Well, I think I take that in a good way. I think that in a good way. So here's an interesting example. I always like to sort of reason from what's already out there. Municipal bonds, actually, are tax-free in the income that they generate. Right? So it's not a foreign idea. It's a special kind of bond. It's why people put their, probably many people in this room have money in munis. And that's different than a risky stock or something like that. You get that tax-free. So you're saying use that to actually bring down the debt load by people to actually put their money in.
Yeah, we
buy
could
them
call
back.
it a Patriot bond. Make it an honor to
We
do
could.
it. Yeah.
Or we could just call it. We could just call it a tax-free bond, so people really know what they're getting.
Or a George Bailey bond.
But here's what I love about that: is the innovative spirit behind it, right? Because all we get in Washington D.C. now is the boring old debate between tax increases and cuts to Social Security and Medicare. And I just believe there is a third way. The third way I'm generally focused on is economic growth, GDP growth.
Well, that's just it.
Yes,
If they
this
get
is
this income
in that direction.
Without, you can reinvest it in the country. Only sell it to Americans. Jesus. Yeah, you have to be
Who
a
asked
citizen to buy it.
who asked me about staffing? You did, right? Well, we might have a Secretary of Patriot Bond position opening up. And we only accept 61 age 61 and above is only the.
Well, I can work with you. I find you
I
very-
appreciate that, Keith.
You're interesting.
And the spirit of it.
Well, you make me want to go out and do something.
I appreciate that. And that means a lot to me. And that's the spirit we need to revive in this country. Right? As Americans, we are the pioneers. We are the explorers. And people said, I started this race, I was 37 years old. They said, oh, that's too young to be the president. I said, I'll address that objection. I turned 38 2 weeks ago. And so we said, we got that one taken care of. But the truth is, one of my compatriots on the debate stage last week says, we don't need a president who's too young. I don't know who he was talking about. But one of the things I was reflecting on it after was, whenever somebody criticizes you, your first impulse is to punch back. And I did some of that, earlier this week. But it also, I think if you're taking it seriously, it's always worth asking the question, is it true? It's worth asking, especially if it's a good, earnest person, as I believe Mike Pence is, who says something like that. Is it true? I mean, look to our history. That pamphlet you're holding is modeled on Thomas Paine's Common Sense. That was the impetus and the motive for this. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence not long after. You know how old he was when he wrote the Declaration of Independence?
37.
33. 33 years old. I'm an old man compared to where he was. When he wrote the entire Declaration of Independence that started our American Revolution. You don't know what else he did? He didn't invent the Patriot Bond, but he invented the swivel chair. Literally, the swivel chair that we sit on today. There's one when we were walking into this restaurant. You could see one. That swivel chair that we sit on today was invented by Thomas Jefferson while he's writing the Declaration of Independence. Think about that. Benjamin Franklin co-signed it not long after he invented the Franklin stove, the bifocal spectacle, the first treatment and remedy for the common cold in this country. We don't do that anymore. We say, you're not an expert. You weren't trained in that. Shut up. Stop spreading misinformation. Versus actually embracing curiosity itself, embracing exploration, unshackling ourselves from the orthodoxies we memorized 40 years ago. So what I love about the question is you're thinking. It doesn't have to be A or B where it's two bad choices. There's a third and better way. And I think that's the way we make it out today to be right now, too, where we are in our national history. We're taught to believe that we're a nation in decline. That we're at the end of the ancient Roman Empire. I don't think so. I don't think we have to be a nation in decline. I think the truth is, as a nation, we are really just a little young. All of us. Going through our own version of adolescence. Figuring out who we're really going to be when we grow up. And when you see it that way, it makes sense. It does to me. When you go through your adolescence, you lose your self-confidence. You lose your identity. You lose your sense of who you are. You lose your way a little bit. But we're stronger for it on the other side as we make our way to our adulthood. So no, I don't think we have to be a nation in decline. I think we are still a nation in our ascent. Maybe the early stages of our ascent. Maybe we're not even yet at base camp. On our way still to, yes, that shining city on a hill that Reagan spoke of 40 years ago. Still that country where no matter who you are, or where your parents came from, or what your skin color is, or how long your last name is, that you still get ahead in this country with your own hard work, your own commitment, your own dedication, and that you know what, you are free to speak your mind at every step of the way. That's what we want to tell the next generation of Americans. That is what we are running to. That is what we together will revive to save this great nation. Thank you all. God bless you. God bless your families. And God bless our great United States of America. Thank you. Thank you. I think we have understood for a long time the problems that our country is facing, but what I want to talk about today is where we're actually going. My parents came to this country in the late 1970s, my dad's case, the early 1980s, and my mom's case, with literally no money in their pocket. In a single generation, I have gone on to found multi-billion-dollar companies, doing it while marrying my wife, Apurva, raising our two sons, following our faith in God. That's the American dream. And I am genuinely worried that that American dream will not exist for my two sons and their generation unless we, all of us here, step up to actually do something about it.
For a long time, we as conservatives, we have been, and I'm not blaming anybody else here but myself. For those of you who have read my 3 books for the last few years, it's about identifying the problem. We've been identifying the problem. We've been running from something. Now is our moment to actually start running to something. To our vision of what it means to be an American. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're in the middle of a national identity crisis today. And I tell you this speaking as a member of my generation. I'm 38 years old. I'm the youngest person ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. And I will tell you this, speaking from that position. We are hungry for a cause. We are starved for purpose and meaning and identity. At a time in our national history when the things that used to fill that void, faith, patriotism, hard work, family, these things have disappeared. And that leaves a black hole, a moral vacuum in its wake. And when you have a black hole that runs that deep, that is when the poison fills the void. It almost doesn't actually matter what the poison is. We obsess over that. Myself, over the last 3 years, we can fall into the trap of obsessing over that too much. Wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, COVIDism, globalism, depression, anxiety, fentanyl, suicide. It's not an accident that we see the rise of these same poisons at the same time in our national history. Think about it. Do you think that's a coincidence? That we see the rise of these different secular religions and cults right at the same time in these last few years in American history? It is not. It is a symptom of a deeper void of purpose in our country. And I think this is our opportunity as conservatives, as Americans, to now level up. To say we're not just going to criticize the poison, right? The left will fill that vacuum with their vision of race, gender, sexuality, climate. We can't fall into the trap of just saying, hey, here's all the reasons why that's wrong, although there's plenty of room to do that. We've done that. Now is our moment to actually run towards a vision of our own. So if they're serving up to our kids race, gender, sexuality, and climate, I want us talking more about the value of each individual, the family, the nation, God. Individual, family, nation, God, that beats race, gender, sexuality, and climate if we have the courage to actually stand up for something. That's the real truth of the matter. This is our moment. Do we have it in us to actually not just stand against, but to stand for? There's an old expression, actually. If there's a hole the size of God in your heart and God does not fill it, something else will instead. I think the same can be said of belief in a nation. You don't pledge allegiance to that flag, you're going to pledge allegiance to something. That's what's going on in the country. This is the stuff of Scripture. Book of Exodus. When the Israelites escape from the Pharaoh, they're lost in the wilderness. They cannot find yet the promised land. What do? They say they want to go back and be ruled by the Pharaoh. See, we're going to bend the knee to something. It might as well be the real thing. And my job as the next president, if you all put me there, is to fill that hole with what a U.S. president can. A vision of our national identity. What it means to be an American. You ask somebody my age that question, what does it mean to be an American? You get a blank stare in response. It's like a deer in the headlights. That is the vacuum. That is the void. So what does it mean to be American? It means we believe in the ideals that set this nation into motion 250 years ago. The ideals of the American Revolution. Ideals like meritocracy and the pursuit of excellence. That you get ahead in this country not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and your contributions. That is why we will end affirmative action in every area of American life. It has been a cancer on our national soul. What does it mean to be American? It means we believe in the rule of law. You know what? That if you are like my parents, you get to come to this country legally through the front door if you want to follow the rules. Pay your taxes. They raised 2 kids, actually, both of us, my brother and I, went on to found companies that help thousands of Americans. We should be open to immigrants like them. But it also means that your first act of entering this country cannot break the law. That is why I will use our own military not to secure an invasion across somebody else's border, but to protect against the invasion on our own southern border in this country. That is what it means to stand for the rule of law in the United States of America. It means we believe in a radical dream that our founding fathers had 250 years ago. A radical dream that I have as a citizen today, that the people who we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government. Not the shadow government of a deep state that actually runs the show today. I'll tell you this, if you all put me there in the White House as your next president, that's your choice, not mine. If I can't work for you for more than 8 years and collect a paycheck from the taxpayer, which I think is a good thing, then neither should any of those federal bureaucrats who were never elected that are reporting into me either. 8-year term limits for the bureaucracy instead of these civil service protections. That's how you actually end the deep state. And by the way, when there are government bureaucracies, 3-letter agencies that should not exist, that have so badly abandoned their purpose that they're hollowed out husks of corruption, from the FBI to the IRS, to the ATF, to the CDC, to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, to the U.S. Department of Education. We will not just get in there and reform them around the edges, no. We will get in there and shut it down. That is what it takes to revive the integrity of a constitutional republic. You see, this is the choice we face in this primary, actually. And we did, I would say, have some banter on the basketball court earlier this week, and that's part of the health of running in a primary against good people who I respect. And, you know, I will not sit here and bash any of them. To the contrary, I respect them as patriots. I'm going to need every one of them in their role when I lead this country forward to the next level. I will need every one of you. This is not a one-person sport. Our national revival is a team sport. But we do face a choice in this primary. The choice is this. Do you want incremental reform? Or do you want revolution? I stand for the side of the American Revolution. I stand for those 1776 ideals that we need to unapologetically embrace. I care deeply about national unity. I think we are skating on thin ice as a country right now. I want to unite this country. Some people, even in our own party, many in our own party, mostly in our own party, think the way we get to national unity, good people, think the way we get there is through compromise. Through showing up at the 50-yard line, compromising, holding hands, and singing Kumbaya. I reject that vision. I think that moment, if it ever existed, has long passed. I think the way we get to national unity in this country is by being uncompromising about the ideals that unite all of us as Americans. I think the way we get to national unity is by rejecting the consensus that diversity is our strength. Our diversity is not our strength. Our strength is what unites us across that diversity. And those are some radical ideas. Free speech,
The idea that you get to say whatever you want as long as I get to in return. That's a radical idea. Self-governance, the idea that we the people can be trusted to govern ourselves rather than turning it over to kings in the back of palace halls in old rural England or kings in the back of three-letter government agencies in Washington, D.C. today. That is a radical ideal. The idea that we pursue excellence without constraint, that I will achieve the maximum of my God-given potential in this nation without any man standing in my way, that is a radical ideal. So you know what, we shouldn't be afraid of that radicalism. People call me an extremist. I am an American extremist because the American experiment itself was extreme. Most of human history, it was done the other way. On the other side of the Atlantic, on the other side of 1776, for most of human history, they said we could not be trusted as the people to sort out our differences on climate change or racial injustice. No, it had to be a small group of enlightened elites. But we in America said, no, we don't do it that way. We do it through a constitutional republic where every citizen's voice and vote counts equally. That is a radical idea. The American Revolution was radical, and the way we unite this country is by reviving those radical ideals that unite us across our skin deep.
Polls consistently show that young people's #1 issue is climate change. How will you, as both President of the United States and leader of the Republican Party, calm their fears that the Republican Party doesn't care about climate change?
So we want to start on this with a show of hands. Do you believe in human behavior is causing climate change? Raise your hand if you do.
Look, we're not school children. Let's have the debate. I mean, I'm happy to take it to start. Alexander?
So do you want to raise your hand or not?
I don't think that's the way to do. So let me just say to Alexander this. First of all, one of the reasons our country's decline is because of the way the corporate media treats Republicans versus Democrats. Biden was on the beach while those people were suffering. He was asked about it. He said, no comment. Are you kidding me? As somebody that's handled disasters in Florida, you got to be activated. You've got to be there. You've got to be present. You've got to be helping people who are doing this. And here's the deal.
Let's just answer the question.
So is that a yes or is that a yes? Is that a hand raise?
You do not.
I think it was a hand raise for him, and it's my hands are in my pockets.
No,
because
no,
the climate change agenda is a
raise a
hoax.
hand.
Let us be honest as Republicans. I'm the only person on the stage who isn't bought and paid for, so I can say this. The climate change agenda is a hoax.
That's just ridiculous.
The climate change agenda is a hoax, and we have to declare independence for it. And the reality is, the anti-carbon agenda is the wet blanket on our economy. And so the reality is, more people are dying of bad climate change policies than they are of actual climate change.
Governor Haley, are you bought and paid for?
Down by 98%
Hold on.
in the last century.
Listen. Hold on.
I've had enough. I've had enough already tonight of a guy who sounds like ChatGPT standing up here. And the last person in one of these debates, Brett, who stood in the middle of the stage and said, what's a skinny guy with an odd last name doing up here, was Barack Obama, and I'm afraid we're dealing with the same type of amateur standing on stage tonight.
Come over and give me a hug. Give me a hug just like you did to Obama.
The same type of amateur.
And you'll help elect me just like you did to Obama, too. Give me that
the
bear hug,
same
brother.
type of amateur.
Hold on. Governor Haley, would you like to respond? Are you bought and paid for?
What I would like to say is the fact that I think this is exactly why Margaret Thatcher said, if you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman. First of all, we do care about clean air, clean water. We want to see that taken care of, but there's a right way to do it. And the right way to do it is, first of all, yes, is climate change real? Yes, it is. But if you want to go and really change the environment, then we need to start telling China and India that they have to lower their emissions. That's where our problem is. And these green subsidies that Biden has put in, all he's done is help China, because he doesn't understand all these electric vehicles that he's done, what that does. Half of the batteries for electric vehicles are made in China. And so that's not helping the environment. You're putting money in China's pocket, and Biden did that. So first of all, I think we need to acknowledge the truth, which is these subsidies are not working. We also need to take on the international world and say, okay, India and China, you've got to stop polluting, and that's when we'll start to deal with
Senator Scott, are you bought and paid for?
Absolutely.
Are you bought and paid for?
I'm sorry?
Are you bought and paid for?
Absolutely not. I mean, here's what the American people deserve, is a debate about the issues that affect their lives. Going back and forth, being childish, is not helpful to the American people to decide on the next leader of our country. Number one, wait a second. Number two, as a kid who grew up in a single-parent household mired in poverty, I wondered, was the American dream real for kids who were devastated by poverty, devastated by the challenges of life? I came to the conclusion that America can do for anyone what she's done for me if we focus on restoring hope, creating opportunities, and protecting America. If we want the environment to be better, and we all do, the best thing to do is to bring our jobs home from China. If we create 10 million new jobs in my Made in America plan, we will have a better economy and a better environment. Let me tell you why I say that, Brett. America,
do it quickly.
America has cut. I'm a Southern boy, I talk slow. So America,
Another one.
That was quick. America has cut our carbon footprint in half in the last 25 years. The places where they are continuing to increase, Africa, 950 million people. India, over 1 billion. China, over 1 billion. Why would we put ourselves at a disadvantage, devastating our own economy? Let's bring our jobs home.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.
All right. Thank you very much, you guys. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Martha McCallum back at Fox News headquarters here in New York after last night's barn burner debate in Wisconsin. A lot to dig into as we get a closer look at some of these GOP hopefuls from last night. Take a look at this and some of the breakout moments that they had. Watch.
I'm the only person on the stage who isn't bought and paid for, so I can say this. The climate change agenda is a hoax. The climate change agenda is a hoax.
I've had enough already tonight of a guy who sounds like ChatGPT standing up here.
Now is not the time for on-the-job training. We don't need to bring in a rookie. We don't need to bring in people without experience.
This is exactly why Margaret Thatcher said, if you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman.
I think the American people deserve to know whether everyone on this stage agrees that I kept my oath to the Constitution that day.
Mike did his duty. I got no beef with him. But here's the thing. Is this what we're going to be focusing on?
Ukraine is not a priority for the United States of America.
You are choosing a murder over a pro-American country. You have no foreign policy experience, and it shows.
And you know what? The foreign policy.
Whoa, so you get the idea. Let's kick things off with Kayleigh McEnany, former White House press secretary and co-host of Outnumbered. Kayleigh, great to see you.
Thank you, Martha.
I'm happy you're here to kind of, having been sitting there, it's good for me to actually look back at some of what was said last night and kind of slow it down and take a look at what made impressions on people. This focus group this morning that I know you saw on America's Newsroom was very interesting. I want to play a little bit of this and get your thoughts out of that. Let's watch.
I think Vivek's on a little bit of thin ice, even with me. At the onset, I'm looking for someone that can win the general. And I think he might have alienated a few people last night, just his abrasiveness.
I was all about Vivek, but you know what? After watching the debate, I do have to agree with some other members on the panel. I think the strongest performer in terms of who will do well in the general election, who will do well with the most Republicans, is actually Ron DeSantis.
Very interesting. What was your take on who stood out and who might be able to pick up some more support?
First, I just want to say what a phenomenal debate. You and Brett did a wonderful job. And as a voter, it was just refreshing to be able to watch a debate about the issues. And that is what we got last night. Who was most behooved by the debate? I think Ron DeSantis, just, reaching out to some conservatives I know across the nation, many of whom are Trump supporters and remain Trump supporters. But I said, who was on the stage? Who do you like? Ron DeSantis was the takeaway. They loved the fact, as one 22-year-old in that focus group said, that the work was done for Ron DeSantis before he walked into the room. He has perhaps the best conservative record of any governor in the nation, although I would say Glenn Youngkin is also in that category. He showed that. He didn't get involved in the phrase. I think the phrase helped him because it might have knocked some people off the edges of the stage. It might be a smaller stage, but he wasn't in the phrase. And he was able to level punches against not Trump, but the ultimate opponent, which is Joe Biden. He also showed a more personal touch, which was one of the critiques of Ron DeSantis, which I think will help him.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that. But just to
on the Vivek issue, because he was getting a lot of attention going in. His numbers were going up. He was, front and center with Ron DeSantis based on the polling last night. But I think it's interesting that some of those voters said that they thought that he went too far, that he was abrasive.
And that's exactly what I was hearing. You know, the Wall Street Journal said that in some ways he sounded like a young man in too much of a hurry. And I think an example of that is by saying everyone was bought and paid for. I think it's hard to make the argument that someone who took on Disney, some would say to his own peril, Ron DeSantis is bought and paid for. Also, he seems to be trying to mimic the style of President Trump. And if there's one thing I know, you can never out-Trump Trump. There is one Donald Trump. He is beloved. And if his ultimate goal is to win the GOP nomination, you've got to get beyond President Trump. But I don't see how you do that if you're Vivek.
So obviously, one of the things that Ron DeSantis was hoping to do last night, based on observing and what he said, was to try to connect with people, because the criticism against him is that he doesn't connect with people, that he doesn't seem relaxed and, emotional. Here's some efforts that he made at doing that last night. Watch.
One of the most impactful moments of my life was when I heard the heartbeat of my oldest daughter in my wife's womb, and then saw the sonograms of all three of my kids. I know a lady in Florida named Penny. She survived multiple abortion attempts. She was left discarded in a pan. Fortunately, her grandmother saved her and brought her to a different hospital. We're better than what the Democrats are selling.
How do you think he did?
I think that was blunting the biggest criticism against Ron DeSantis, which is you're not connecting with voters. Elections are about people. They're not about politicians. And to actually hear the names of people in a succinct way, to see their stories, to hear their stories from a politician was powerful. It's one thing that former President Trump really excels at when he does these off-the-record stops. I know he went to a Dairy Queen and, he says, what the heck's a blizzard, and has this just viral moment. He's very good at this retail politics. And to succeed in a GOP primary, you've got to be good at that. And to make this about people was a huge win for Ron DeSantis.
But I think there's still a question about whether or not he is really making that personal connection, where people feel like they know him and they like him. I know he is very well liked in Florida, but crossing, it's one thing to sort of say, I'm going to tell this story and I'm going to tell that story. But do you think, based on what you're hearing from people, that he had a breakthrough in terms of, that's who he is? I really saw his heart last night. Do you think?
That's the million-dollar question. I mean, to have a breakthrough, you have to stop and the hemorrhaging in the polls where there is a 40% gap between you and President Trump. I don't think this reversed the numbers in any dramatic way. Did he make some gains? Absolutely he did. But I think it's about winnowing the field. He's going to get more time as these debates progress because the field will get smaller and smaller. So the longer he can stay, the longer he can rack up points. Perhaps he can creep up on Trump. But I would just note Trump's lead, no one in the history of modern politics has ever lost with a lead that big. So in order to win, you got to defy history.
Yeah, or something very big has to change in the whole dynamic, in the world, in the election. Let's watch this from Nikki Haley, because I'm also hearing a lot of people say that this resonated with them. Watch this.
Can't we all agree that we should ban late-term abortions? Can't we all agree that we should encourage adoptions? Can't we all agree that doctors and nurses who don't believe in abortion shouldn't have to perform them? Can't we all agree that contraception should be available? And can't we all agree that we are not going to put a woman in jail or give her the death penalty if she gets an abortion? Let's treat this like a respectful issue that it is, and humanize the situation and stop demonizing the situation.
So obviously, suburban women voters, who I should point out have different views on abortion. They're not a monolith by any means, but they're a very important part of the vote. Do you think she made ground with them last night?
Look, in a general election, that argument may go somewhere. I don't know of a single person on that stage that wants the death penalty for a woman, a vulnerable woman who decides to have an abortion. No one in the party believes that. I think she went too far, especially when the Des Moines Register poll says 60% of Iowa caucus goers agree with the fetal heartbeat legislation, like what Ron DeSantis signed, and other governors like Glenn Newsom. Yes.
Okay. Kayleigh, thank you. I could go on with you for the rest of the hour, but it's great to have you here. Thank you very much, Kayleigh McEnany.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kayleigh McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.
Got a Fox News alert for you right there. Donald J. Trump became the first president ever to get a mugshot after turning himself in. at a Georgia County jail on election interference charges in the state of Georgia.
And our next guest says if he is elected president, he will pardon Donald Trump. GOP presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy joins us now. Good morning, Vivek.
Good morning, Ainsley.
Good morning. We've known you for years. You wrote your book. You've been, you've come on our show a lot. Then we see you up on the debate stage. You decide to run for president, and you just come out so energetic, and the polls are showing that you are loved. You really just came back from behind. Tell us, what is your reaction to all of this?
So I do think we're skating on thin ice as a country right now, Ainsley, and my top goal as U.S. president is to reunite this country. I still believe that's possible. I don't think we're working with a lot of time here. If my two sons, who are toddlers now, if they graduate from 12th grade before we fix this, I genuinely worry we will not have a country left. That is what gives me my sense of urgency, and that is why I have been so clear, despite being a competitor to Donald Trump in this primary. I have been crystal clear that, yes, I will pardon him of any federal crime of which I'm able to. And the reason why is that is a precondition for moving our nation forward. We cannot turn into a banana republic where the party in power uses police force to indict and arrest its political opponents in the middle of an election. That is not how we do it in the United States of America. And if there's one principle we should all be able to unite around, whether or not you disagree with the president, it is we the people who select the president, not the federal administrative police state. And that's why I've been so clear on this issue.
And Vivek, you mentioned you're a competitor. You and Donald Trump are both competing to be president of the United States, but you guys have a lot of the same policies. And it's like, well, why would I vote for Vivek when I can get the real McCoy if I like Donald Trump's policies?
The reality is, being the president is not just about policy. You're right. Donald Trump and I are both America First candidates. There are some small differences. I would go further with some elements of the America First agenda. Use the military on the southern border, not just build the wall. Shut down the Department of Education, not just put Betsy DeVos, a good person, on top and tell her to reform it. So in many ways, I think I am going further, but that's not the real difference. I'm from a different generation. I'm 38 years old. We are reaching young Americans as somebody who has lived the American dream as a first-generation American. I want to build a multi-ethnic working-class coalition that delivers not just a 50.1 electoral margin, but a landslide, a moral mandate. And I genuinely believe that, as I said before, we're skating on such thin ice that this has to be a landslide election. Like Reagan delivered in 1980, I think I am the single candidate on this Republican primary that can actually deliver that landslide in 2024, and that is a critical step to reunite this country. We're reaching people young and old, black and white, man and woman. It doesn't matter. The places I've gone, from the south side of Chicago to Kensington and Philadelphia, these are places where traditional Republicans don't dare go. Many Democrats don't even dare go. But to me, the America First movement means we put all Americans first. And I think that that landslide is something that I'm uniquely equipped to deliver.
Yeah, I mean, the president tried to put federal troops into those hellacious city streets, and these mayors push back. So that's what you'll be up against. You're also going to be up against Ambassador Nikki Haley. And you guys could not be more disagreeable when it comes to our role in the hot spots in the world and the places that matter most. Here's what she told us last hour about how wrong she still thinks you are.
When you talk about Ukraine, I understand that Americans are divided on what we should be doing with Ukraine, but Vivek was completely wrong to say that we have to choose between the border or protecting our national security. We do it all. We do it all to make sure we keep Americans safe.
So she went on there, Taiwan, stop Russia there is a message to China because they're inextricably linked.
So, look, I respect Ambassador Haley and her experiences, but I respectfully disagree with her. And I think the existing foreign policy establishment has gotten it wrong for so long, they're getting it wrong here, too. We are driving Russia further into China's hands.
But they invaded Ukraine, Vivek. They invaded Ukraine. Just give them the 20% of the country?
Well, here's what I would say. Just like Nixon did not trust Mao, we still had to pull Mao Zedong out of the hands of the USSR. I don't trust Putin any more than Putin trusts us.
But you want to take his word that he'll divorce himself from China?
No, I will not take his word. I will make him actually abide by an agreement with the United States with hard conditions attached to it. If they resume joint military exercises with China, there will be consequences in my deal with them. We will immediately then look at other actions that actually put Russia in a tougher spot than they are even now, maximum pressure campaign. But what I've said is we can actually go the other direction, reopen economic relations with Russia, freeze the current lines of control, make a commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO.
So let Russia take 20% of the country. They took it. They just took it.
The reality,
and you said
the reality
let them
is,
have it?
what do we get in return?
But listen.
The reality is what we get in return. I'm keeping my eye on the prize, Brian. Here's the eye on the prize. The Russia-China alliance is the greatest threat the United States faces. There is not a single candidate in either party who has offered a coherent plan of how to disband that alliance. I have. And I want to use the Ukraine war as a chance to bring that alliance apart. That will be the single greatest advance in U.S.
We're watching the Russian army deconstructed before our eyes. We're watching the Russian army deconstructed before our eyes without any American blood. They are the aggressors, and our foreign policy did win us the Cold War, which I assume you know.
Yes, in the modern Cold War, Brian, that the old establishment needs to wake up and see is that the USSR doesn't exist anymore, but communist China does. And unlike the USSR, we now depend on communist China for our modern way of life. If that had been a Russian spy balloon flying over half the United States, we would have shot it down in an instant and ratcheted up sanctions. But because it was a Chinese spy balloon, we're scared, so we didn't do it.
Right.
And the reality is China is bolder because they know Russia is in their camp. Russia does have the largest nuclear stockpile
You will never separate them.
Why do you want to embolden China even more and allow them to take
disagree
Taiwan?
respectfully.
What about Taiwan? You said that you were fine basically with China taking Taiwan?
That's actually not what I said.
Okay, what did you
to
say?
The contrary, I'm glad
Clarify
we're
it.
having this discussion. What I said is there isn't a single candidate in the Republican Party who's had the courage to say what I've said, which is we will defend Taiwan. Right now, the U.S. policy of strategic ambiguity doesn't allow establishment politicians to say that. The U.S. policy in both parties is a one China policy. I say move beyond that to strategic clarity. I said we will defend Taiwan, at least until we have semiconductor independence in this country, at which point we will reevaluate.
And then we let them take it.
At which point we'll reevaluate.
All right.
Brian, I will remind you that the U.S. policy right now is a one China policy. Donald Trump was derided for picking up a phone call from the Taiwanese president. That's how pathetic our current policy is. I think we should be clear that we will defend Taiwan.
Believe it or not,
but
this
also
president.
make it clear to Xi Jinping.
Believe it or not, this president keeps saying we are. He's different from his State Department.
Vivek, thank you very much for joining us today. We know you've had a really big week. You did a really good job. Do you have enough energy to do like 40 burpees for us right now on TV?
Oh, my gosh.
We might go for 45 today, but what I'll say is I love the conversation with you guys.
All right.
Great quality conversation. Leaves me energized. We'll do more of it.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank
Good
you.
luck. I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.
I think we have understood for a long time the problems that our country is facing, but what I want to talk about today is where we're actually going. My parents came to this country in the late 1970s, in my dad's case, the early 1980s, in my mom's case, with literally no money in their pocket. In a single generation, I have gone on to found multi-billion-dollar companies, doing it while marrying my wife Apurva, raising our two sons, following our faith in God. That's the American dream. And I am genuinely worried that that American dream will not exist for my two sons and their generation unless we, all of us here, step up to actually do something about it. For a long time, we as conservatives, we have been, and I'm not blaming anybody else here but myself. For those of you who have read my 3 books for the last few years, it's about identifying the problem. We've been identifying the problem. We've been running from something. Now is our moment to actually start running to something. To our vision of what it means to be an American. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're in the middle of a national identity crisis today. And I tell you this speaking as a member of my generation. I'm 38 years old. I'm the youngest person ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. And I will tell you this, speaking from that position. We are hungry for a cause. We are starved for purpose and meaning and identity. At a time in our national history when the things that used to fill that void, faith, patriotism, hard work, family, these things have disappeared. And that leaves a black hole, a moral vacuum in its wake. And when you have a black hole that runs that deep, that is when the poison fills the void. It almost doesn't actually matter what the poison is. We obsess over that. Myself, over the last 3 years, we can fall into the trap of obsessing over that too much. Wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, COVIDism, globalism, depression, anxiety, fentanyl, suicide. It's not an accident that we see the rise of these same poisons at the same time in our national history. Think about it. Do you think that's a coincidence? That we see the rise of these different secular religions and cults right at the same time in these last few years in American history? It is not. It is a symptom of a deeper void of purpose in our country. And I think this is our opportunity as conservatives, as Americans, to now level up. To say we're not just going to criticize the poison, right? The left will fill that vacuum with their vision of race, gender, sexuality, climate. We can't fall into the trap of just saying, hey, here's all the reasons why that's wrong, although there's plenty of room to do that. We've done that. Now is our moment to actually run towards a vision of our own. So if they're serving up to our kids race, gender, sexuality, and climate, I want us talking more about the value of each individual, the family, the nation, God. Individual, family, nation, God, that beats race, gender, sexuality, and climate if we have the courage to actually stand up for something. That's the real truth of the matter. This is our moment. Do we have it in us to actually not just stand against, but to stand for? There's an old expression, actually. If there's a hole the size of God in your heart and God does not fill it, something else will instead. I think the same can be said of belief in a nation. You don't pledge allegiance to that flag, you're going to pledge allegiance to something. That's what's going on in the country. This is the stuff of Scripture. Book of Exodus. When the Israelites escape from the Pharaoh, they're lost in the wilderness. They cannot find yet the promised land. What do? They say they want to go back and be ruled by the Pharaoh. See, we're going to bend the knee to something. It might as well be the real thing. And my job as the next president, if you all put me there, is to fill that hole with what a U.S. president can. A vision of our national identity. What it means to be an American. You ask somebody my age that question, what does it mean to be an American? You get a blank stare in response. It's like a deer in the headlights. That is the vacuum. That is the void. So what does it mean to be American? It means we believe in the ideals that set this nation into motion 250 years ago. The ideals of the American Revolution. Ideals like meritocracy and the pursuit of excellence. That you get ahead in this country, not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and your contributions. That is why we will end affirmative action in every area of American life. It has been a cancer on our national soul. What does it mean to be American? It means we believe in the rule of law. You know what? That if you are like my parents, you get to come to this country legally through the front door if you want to follow the rules. Pay your taxes. They raised 2 kids, actually, both of us. My brother and I went on to found companies that help thousands of Americans. We should be open to immigrants like them. But it also means that your first act of entering this country cannot break the law. That is why I will use our own military not to secure an invasion across somebody else's border, but to protect against the invasion on our own southern border in this country. That is what it means to stand for the rule of law in the United States of America. It means we believe in a radical dream that our founding fathers had 250 years ago. A radical dream that I have as a citizen today, that the people who we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government. Not the shadow government of a deep state that actually runs the show today. I'll tell you this, if you all put me there in the White House as your next president, that's your choice, not mine. If I can't work for you for more than 8 years and collect a paycheck from the taxpayer, which I think is a good thing, then neither should any of those federal bureaucrats who were never elected that are reporting into me either. 8-year term limits for the bureaucracy instead of these civil service protections. That's how you actually end the deep state. And by the way, when there are government bureaucracies, 3-letter agencies that should not exist, that have so badly abandoned their purpose that they're hollowed out husks of corruption, from the FBI to the IRS, to the ATF, to the CDC, to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, to the U.S. Department of Education. We will not just get in there and reform them around the edges, no. We will get in there and shut it down. That is what it takes to revive the integrity of a constitutional republic. You see, this is the choice we face in this primary, actually. And we did, I would say, have some banter on the basketball court earlier this week, and that's part of the health of running in a primary against good people who I respect. And, you know, I will not sit here and bash any of them. To the contrary, I respect them as patriots. I'm going to need every one of them in their role when I lead this country forward to the next level. I will need every one of you. This is not a one-person sport. Our national revival is a team sport. But we do face a choice in this primary. The choice is this. Do you want incremental reform? Or do you want revolution? I stand for the side of the American Revolution. I stand for those 1776 ideals that we need to unapologetically embrace. I care deeply about national unity. I think we are skating on thin ice as a country right now. I want to unite this country. Some people, even in our own party, many in our own party, mostly in our own party, think the way we get to national unity, good people, think the way we get there is through compromise. Through showing up at the 50-yard line, compromising, holding hands, and singing Kumbaya. I reject that vision. I think that moment, if it ever existed, has long passed. I think the way we get to national unity in this country is by being uncompromising about the ideals that unite all of us as Americans. I think the way we get to national unity is by rejecting the consensus that diversity is our strength. Our diversity is not our strength. Our strength is what unites us across that diversity. And those are some radical ideas. Free speech. The idea that you get to say whatever you want as long as I get to in return. That's a radical idea. Self-governance. The idea that we, the people, can be trusted to govern ourselves rather than turning it over to kings in the back of palace halls in old rural England or kings in the back of 3-letter government agencies in Washington, D.C. today. That is a radical ideal. The idea that we pursue excellence without constraint, that I will achieve the maximum of my God-given potential in this nation without any man standing in my way, that is a radical ideal. So you know what, we shouldn't be afraid of that radicalism. People call me an extremist. I am an American extremist. Because the American experiment itself was extreme. Most of human history, it was done the other way. On the other side of the Atlantic, on the other side of 1776, for most of human history, they said we could not be trusted as the people to sort out our differences on climate change or racial injustice. No, it had to be a small group of enlightened elites. But we in America said, no, we don't do it that way. We do it through a constitutional republic where every citizen's voice and vote counts equally. That is a radical idea. The American Revolution was radical, and the way we unite this country is by reviving those radical ideals that unite us across our skin deep.